Welcome to Midnight Casebook, where every shadow hides a secret and every mystery begs to be solved. Tonight, we unravel the chilling tale of Father Brown's chilling investigation begin, a fan-made story paying homage to the brilliance of G.K. Chesterton's legendary detective. We'd love to have you along for this enigmatic journey. Drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from, share your theories, and if you spot any inconsistencies, don't hesitate to call them out. Your keen eyes and sharp minds help us craft even more captivating mysteries in the future. Chapter 1. The Man in the Fog. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days, drumming on the rooftops like a funeral march, hissing on the cobbles, turning the alleys into trickling black veins that threaded through the city like rot beneath the skin. Neon signs flickered in fits, green, red, sometimes both, casting half-formed halos around shadows that moved with too much purpose in the mist. The city was full of ghosts and lies, and somewhere between the gutters and the cathedral bells, Father Brown walked with his umbrella tilted against the wind, the hem of his cassock soaked and heavy with rain. He wasn't much to look at. Round face, rounder frame, glasses that caught the street lamp glare in circles of tired light. He didn't stride like a man on a mission. He waddled like a man who had all the time in the world. But beneath the calm surface of his eyes, there was a spark. Not suspicion, not fear, understanding. The sort of look a man gets when he's seen enough to know what most people want to forget. The knock came just after matins, sharp and too fast, like the woman on the other side wanted to outrun her own nerves. The chapel was empty, but for the smell of candle smoke and the soft creak of the old pews settling like bones. Father Brown opened the door to find her standing there in a coat too fine for this part of town, and heels that sank into the wet steps like they didn't belong anywhere near them. Her hair was red, a crimson halo in the gloom, and her lipstick matched like a warning. "Are you Father Brown?" she asked, though she already knew. People like her always knew who to look for. The trick was getting them to admit it. "I am," he said simply. "They told me you help people." "Sometimes," he said gently. "My brother's gone, missing 3 days now, and no one will lift a finger." He didn't ask why, not yet. He just stepped aside and let her in. Inside, the church was all soft, shadows and silent saints. She looked out of place, but not uncomfortable, like she'd practiced looking vulnerable in better rooms. "His name's Louis," she said, sitting without being asked. "Louis Klein. He worked at the Nightjar, down on 4th and Vine. He's a piano man, keeps his head down, doesn't owe anyone money." "But someone's looking for him," Father Brown said. Her eyes flicked to him. That told him enough. "You're not what I expected," she said, studying him now. "I thought I'd have to cry harder." "You still might," he said quietly. He didn't ask if she'd gone to the police. She had, of course, and they'd turned her away with tired eyes and cheap cynicism. This city wasn't interested in missing piano men, not unless they owed someone important or made the news bleeding. Louis was neither. "I'll go to the Nightjar," he said, rising. "Would you mind writing down your brother's address? And yours?" She hesitated just a moment, just long enough. Then she took the pen he offered and scribbled something elegant on the back of a prayer card. Her perfume lingered on the paper. "Miss Klein," he said, taking her hand gently, "I'm not a detective. I can't promise justice, only the truth." "Sometimes," she said, lips parting just enough, "that's the most dangerous thing of all." By the time he reached the Nightjar, The streets had turned to oil-slick rivers, and the bar sat like a wound between two tenements. The sign above the door buzzed low, one of the letters, dead, so it read, not JR, in dim red light. Inside, it was all smoke and saxophone. A woman sang in a voice like broken glass and regret, and no one looked up when the priest stepped in. No one ever did. He sat quietly at the bar. The bartender, tall, built like a punch and just as friendly, eyed him with suspicion. "We do weddings and funerals," he said, "but this ain't a confessional." "I'm looking for a piano player," Father Brown said mildly. "Name's Louis Klein." The music kept playing, but something shifted. A glass stopped mid-polish. A man at the end of the bar blinked twice too fast. The bartender leaned in. "Don't know him?" "Pity," said Father Brown, "because I know someone who misses him, and a few who are scared to say why." That got him silence. The tight kind, where people suddenly realize the man in the collar might not be as soft as he looks. The bartender leaned back, expression unreadable. "He hasn't played here in 3 nights," he said finally. "Last we heard, he was headed down to the docks, said he had something to settle." "With who?" "Didn't say, but if you're smart, you'll let it lie. Preacher like you poke too hard, you'll end up praying over your own ribs." Father Brown smiled gently. It wouldn't be the first time someone thought prayers were softer than fists. Outside, the fog was thicker now, curling in like smoke from some larger fire. Down at the docks, everything smelled of rust and salt and the old things men do when they think no one's watching. He passed a man slumped in a doorway, bottle still clutched in sleep. Rats scurried under crates. Somewhere, a ship groaned against its moorings, like it didn't want to stay tied. He found the warehouse by instinct, not evidence. Something about it felt unfinished. Half-open doors, shadows that didn't move right. He pushed inside, careful. No sound but the drip of rain through holes in the roof and the distant creak of ropes. Then something shifted. A boot. A breath. Lost. "Father?" The voice came from behind a stack of crates, deep, amused, and wrong. "Looking for someone," Father Brown said. "He's not here," said another voice. This one was sharp, female, and bitter like old coffee. "No one's here but the ghosts." He turned to see her, blonde this time, in a coat too short, and a cigarette burning like a secret. She smiled, like she'd seen better men fall harder. "Miss Klein, I presume," he said. She laughed. "You figured it out. You lied about your brother. He's not my brother, but he is missing. And he did have something people wanted." "What?" "Evidence," she said, blowing smoke. "Ledger pages, names, numbers, all the sins of the city bound in ink." "Whose sins?" "Everyone's." And then the other man stepped into view, tall, heavy-set, with a face like a broken clock and fists like ham. He had a gun, but it hung loose in his hand, like he hadn't decided whether he needed it. Father Brown didn't flinch. "So you thought if I found Louis, I'd lead you to the ledger," he said. "You're predictable," she said. "Priests always are. You see a lost sheep, you follow. And wolves," he said, "often dress as shepherds." The man moved in closer, but Father Brown didn't step back. Instead, he looked at the woman. "Why lie to me?" "Because you're harmless," she said, though her voice trembled just a touch. "You're not a cop. You're not a killer." "No," he said softly, "just someone who listens and knows when someone is more afraid than they let on." She blinked. The man raised the gun. "I wouldn't," Father Brown said, turning to him. "You're already in over your head. If you shoot me, You'll have 100 real detectives sniffing your trail, and not one of them will pray for you. The silence cracked, like ice underfoot. Then the gun lowered. Just a bit. What do you want? The man asked. The truth, Father Brown said, and the location of Louis Klein. The woman looked away. He's dead. No, said Father Brown. He's not. You would have said that at the church. If it were true, you're lying now because you think he still has the ledger. She didn't answer. I think Louis ran, Father Brown continued. I think he saw something in that bar. Maybe someone important meeting someone they shouldn't. And he took evidence thinking it would keep him safe. But it only made him a target. And you, Miss Klein, whatever your real name is, you thought I could flush him out. Her mouth tightened. You talk a lot for a priest. I listen more, he said. That's how I know you're not a killer. You just wanted what you thought would make you powerful. But power bought with fear always turns to dust. Outside, the fog was lifting just a little, enough for the police lights to catch the mist in silent red and blue pulses. Father Brown had made a call before he'd entered the warehouse, one he'd hoped wouldn't be needed. Run if you want, he said gently, but sin has a way of finding you out, and the truth always waits, patient as death. They didn't run, not right away. The woman sank down onto a crate, cigarette shaking in her fingers. The man sat too, heavy and tired. They weren't villains, just lost souls who'd traded too many truths for lies and didn't know how to stop. When the police came, they didn't resist. And when the officers tried to rough the big man up, Father Brown stepped between them. Let the law be just, he said. Not cruel. Later, he found Louis Klein in the back room of a flophouse near the cathedral. Thin, scared, but alive. The ledger was gone. Burned, he said. He didn't want it anymore. I thought it'd save me, Louis whispered, but it just made me a ghost. Father Brown put a hand on his shoulder. Then let's bring you back to the light, he said. It's not too late. Not yet. Outside, the fog finally began to break, giving way to cold, clear dawn. Chapter 2. A knock before Vespers. It was the kind of grey that seeped into your bones, like the city had forgotten what sunlight looked like and didn't care to remember. Rain lashed the windows in thin, stinging streaks, and the streets outside St. Dominic's were slick with oil and gutter water. The bell above the chapel door had long since rusted into silence, so when the knock came, just before the solemn hush of Vespers, it was more like a warning than a request. Father Brown paused in his quiet sweeping of the aisle, the broom resting against his shoulder like a staff from a pilgrimage. He didn't hurry to the door. He never did. The woman waiting on the other side looked like she'd stepped out of a dream someone would rather forget. High heels splashed with grime, fur coat damp at the edges, and eyes that didn't blink enough. Her lipstick was too perfect for this kind of weather, and her smile was the sort that tried to fold you into a lie before you realized it. Father Brown, she said, as though reciting the name of a drink she'd once tasted and didn't trust. I am, he replied simply, stepping aside. She moved past him, dripping rainwater onto the old stones of the vestibule, glancing once at the worn crucifix above the altar like it might decide to speak. My name's Violet Dane, she said. You've probably heard of me. I'm afraid I don't listen to the wireless much. She arched a brow, half amused, half insulted. Singer. Mostly clubs. Some pictures once. He nodded politely. He knew the type. Not her trade, but the soul beneath it. The kind that sang too loud, in rooms too dark, always trying to drown something out. My sister's dead, she said abruptly, and the police are calling it a suicide. Father Brown looked at her with those quiet, unblinking eyes of his, like he could hear the rest of the sentence already. But you don't believe them, he said. She smirked, lighting a cigarette with a gold lighter shaped like a serpent. They're calling it an overdose, pills, gin, same old story. And the truth? She was scared. The week before she died, she called me, said someone was following her, said if anything happened to her, it wouldn't be her fault. Father Brown didn't write anything down. He didn't need to. Her name was Clara, Violet said, her voice dropping a note. She was a secretary, worked uptown, for a man named Bartholomew Crane. That name he did know. A banker turned political donor, turned rumor, tall buildings and low morals, the sort of man who didn't show up in church unless it was to donate stained glass with his name etched at the bottom. I want you to find out what really happened, Violet said. You're not a cop, which means you might actually care. Father Brown studied her face. Underneath the powder and polish, he saw what the papers wouldn't. Not grief exactly, guilt, the sort that festered into anger. She didn't want justice. Not yet. She wanted to be right. I'll look into it, he said softly. The apartment on Rose and Carter was quiet. Third floor, cheap curtains, cracked linoleum, and the ghost of a woman who'd spent more time worrying than living. Clara Dane had left behind a record player, a stack of dime store novels, and a diary hidden behind a loose board in the floor. Father Brown found it without looking hard. People hide things where they themselves would think to look. The last few entries were scattered, short sentences, fragments of fear. One name kept reappearing. Mr. Crane. Father Brown took the book and stood for a long while in the stillness. The bed was unmade, the cup on the table half full of cold tea. There had been no struggle, just surrender. Or so someone wanted it to look. The next stop was the precinct. He didn't much like policemen, not for any personal reason, but because they rarely listened until they'd already decided who was guilty. The desk sergeant was a man with a gut like a keg and a voice like a buzzsaw. Suicides open and shut, he grunted. No signs of foul play. And believe me, Father, we'd know. Did she leave a note? The sergeant shifted. Number, but she didn't need to. Pills and gins say it all. Father Brown looked at him quietly. Sometimes the things we leave unsaid speak loudest. The detective assigned to the case, a man named Harlan, had the tired eyes of someone who'd stared down too many bodies and too few confessions. He met with Father Brown in a smoke-stained office, cluttered with old files and newer cynicism. Crane's clean, Harlan said, before Father Brown had even opened his mouth. We've had rumors, nothing that sticks. Clara was afraid of him. She was afraid of something. Could have been a lover. Could have been her own shadow. Girls like that, they burn too fast. Father Brown didn't answer. Instead, he handed Harlan the diary. The detective flipped through it, frowning. Even if she was scared, it doesn't mean she didn't jump, he muttered. Fear makes people do strange things. Sin makes them stranger, Father Brown replied. That night, he went to the only place in town where Bartholomew Crane made public appearances, the Diamond Grill. It was a high-class joint with low-class secrets, and everyone there wore tuxedos like armor and smiles like currency. The maitre d' looked ready to toss him until Crane himself spotted the priest from across the room and raised a hand. Father Brown, he said with a wolf's grin, I didn't expect to see you among the heathens. I often find the lost sheep outside the pasture, Father Brown said, sitting without invitation. Crane was slick, oiled hair, silk tie, and eyes that didn't blink unless they had to. He exhaled cigar smoke like it was perfume and watched the priest with thin amusement. This about Clara? Father Brown said nothing. She was troubled, Crane said with a shrug. A lovely girl, but fragile, sensitive. I gave her a job. That's more than most would. Did she threaten you? Crane's eyes narrowed. Just for a second. Of course not. Did she know something that could ruin you? Crane laughed, but it was hollow. You think a secretary could bring down a man like me? I think truth has toppled bigger thrones than yours, Father Brown said softly. Crane's tone hardened. You might wear the collar, Father, but this isn't your flock. You should keep to your sermons. I don't give many, Father Brown said, standing. I listen. And I listen best when the powerful talk too much. He left Crane smirking, but the smirk didn't last. By the time Father Brown reached the sidewalk, he could feel the weight of eyes behind him. The city had a way of watching back when you stared too long into its cracks. The thug caught up to him 2 blocks later. Big, in a coat that smelled like sweat and bourbon, he shoved Father Brown into an alley with the ease of a bouncer removing a drunk. Crane says, back off. Father Brown adjusted his hat. And you always do what you're told. The punch didn't come. The man hesitated. Father Brown had that effect. He looked at you like he already knew the reason you couldn't sleep at night. You got a family? Father Brown asked gently. The thug blinked. Because one day, someone might ask your daughter for help, and maybe the man she fears wears cufflinks with your boss's initials. The thug stared, jaw twitching. Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared into the fog. Back at St. Dominic's, the chapel was empty, save for the flicker of votive candles and the slow tolling of midnight. Violet was waiting in the back pew, her coat pulled tight, her face paler than before. You were right, she said. She had something, not just a diary, tapes. She recorded phone calls, conversations, blackmail, bribes. Crane was planning to run for city council. Clara said he'd do anything to keep his record clean. Father Brown sat beside her. Do you have them? She nodded. But I listened, and I can't bring it to the police. Not just Crane, half the council, judges, cops. You're afraid? She nodded again. This time, no bravado. Where are the tapes? She paused. Safe. Somewhere no one can find them. Father Brown didn't press. He simply reached for her hand, held it with quiet strength. You don't have to burn the city to find justice, he said. Just a candle in the right window. The next morning, a fire broke out in Crane's penthouse. Electrical, they said. Faulty wiring. He survived, barely. By noon, the tapes were delivered anonymously to the press. The scandal broke like thunder. Crane was arrested. So were 2 judges and 3 city officials. Harlan, the detective, showed up at the chapel that night, his face tired but grateful. How'd you get her to talk? I didn't, Father Brown said. I let her remember who she was before the lies. Harlan lit a cigarette, blew smoke at the ceiling. This city's full of rot. Yes, Father Brown agreed. But rot is just what happens when you forget to plant anything else. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, but the streets were still wet, still dark, still full of shadows that hadn't quite given up. Father Brown walked back inside, the silence of the chapel welcoming him like an old friend. Somewhere, A candle flickered near the altar, and somewhere a soul had turned back from the edge. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Confessional. It was nearing midnight when the confessional door creaked open and swallowed Father Brown into its shadowed hush. The church was empty, save for the hiss of the rain outside and the distant chime of a passing streetcar. In this part of town, confession wasn't just for sins of the soul. It was for secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. The confessional booth, dark and panelled in worn oak, felt less like a sacred space tonight and more like the holding cell of some unseen court. Father Brown folded his hands and waited, still as stone. The other side of the screen remained silent for a long time. Then a voice, low, breathless, almost a whisper, slipped through the mesh like cigarette smoke. "Father, I did something I can't take back." Father Brown didn't flinch. "Tell me." "She's dead," the voice said, barely above the rain. "And I don't know if it was supposed to happen that way, but I was part of it. I think I was." "Who is she?" A pause, a stifled breath, then Lucille. Lucille Dante. That name carried weight. Even in a city riddled with corpses and clamor, Lucille's name stood out. Singer, siren, and scandal-wrapped socialite, with a taste for danger and a list of lovers longer than her legs. She'd been found the night before, floating face down in a private club's ornamental pool, dressed in red and soaked in rumor. The papers called it suicide. The cops called it a closed case. But Father Brown knew the city too well to believe in clean endings. "Why did you come here?" he asked gently. "Because I can't go to the police, and I can't carry it anymore." Father Brown leaned forward slightly. "Did you kill her?" "No," the voice said quickly. Too quickly. "At least, I didn't want to." The curtain rustled, a figure shifted, then silence. He was gone. Before Father Brown could open the door, a shadow, fleeing another shadow. The next morning the rain had stopped, but the sky still hung low and heavy, like it didn't trust the sun to do its job. Father Brown walked to the Dante estate, a limestone fortress dressed in Art Deco arrogance and guarded by a gate that whispered wealth with every squeak. He was greeted by a butler, with eyes like wet marbles and a frown carved into his face. "You're not the press," the man said. "No," Father Brown replied, "just a friend of the truth." Lucille's brother, Raymond Dante, met him in a room lined with mirrors and the ghosts of cocktail parties. Raymond looked like money and menace in equal measure, slick hair, stiff collar, and a scar under his right eye that wasn't for decoration. "I heard about the priest poking around," Raymond said, lounging like a man who owned the couch and the air around it. "Didn't expect you to show up this fast." "I don't like waiting," Father Brown said, setting his hat down. "It's a habit from watching too many people die slowly." Raymond smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "If you're here about Lucille, it's old news. Case closed." "She was killed," Father Brown said. "She drowned," Raymond replied, "and she left a note." "No ink smudges on the page," Father Brown said. "Not a single one. That tells me she wrote it before the crying started, or someone else did." Raymond stood. "Are you accusing me, Father?" "Number, I'm listening. And what I hear is silence." Raymond's jaw tensed. "She had enemies, jealous women, angry lovers. Take your pick." Father Brown tilted his head. "But not family?" Raymond didn't answer. The butler returned with a silver tray and a tighter frown. On the way out, Father Brown stopped by Lucille's room. The scent of perfume lingered like a memory too proud to leave. The vanity was bare, save for one photograph, Lucille smiling, her arms around another woman. The frame was cracked, deliberately. He took the streetcar to Midtown, where the clubs were smoky, the gin was cheap, and everyone had a secret worth dying for. He found her name in whispers. Thelma Kay, jazz singer, Lucille's former roommate, and the last known person to see her alive. She sang at a place called The Velvet Knife, a basement club, with red lights and black hearts. Thelma had a voice like midnight and a look that said she didn't trust the dawn. When she saw Father Brown at the bar, she finished her number and walked straight to him. "You're late," she said. "For what?" "For the reckoning." They talked in a back room, lined with peeling wallpaper and the stale scent of bourbon. "I didn't kill her," Thelma said, "but I know who did." Father Brown waited. "Raymond," she whispered. "She told me he'd been watching her, following her. He hated the men she saw, said she was ruining the family name." Father Brown studied her face. "Why didn't you come forward?" Thelma looked away. "Because Lucille had something. A letter. From a senator. Something big. She said if anything happened to her, it would all come out. But the letter's gone. She trusted you." "She trusted too many," Thelma said bitterly. Outside, the street was dark again. Rain began to fall in soft sheets. Father Brown stood beneath the flickering street lamp and let the silence guide him. He had the shape of the truth now, but the outline was missing one thing: the heart. He returned to St. Dominic's just before evening mass. The pews were empty, but the confessional wasn't. Someone sat there again, waiting. He entered without a word. "You found her, didn't you?" the voice said. This time, a man's voice, clearer now, steadier. "Thelma." "Yes." "She doesn't know the whole story." "I don't need the whole story," Father Brown said. "Just the part that hurts." The man sighed. "I loved her, Lucille, but she didn't love me. She used me. She said she had enemies, that she needed protection. So I followed her. I kept watch. I saw the letter." "You took it?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I thought it would make her stay." There was a long pause. "Raymond didn't kill her," he said. "It was an accident. She slipped. I was there. I tried to help, but she was gone before I could, before I even moved." "Then why lie?" "Because it's easier than the truth. The truth makes you guilty." Father Brown opened the door slowly and stepped into the light. A man in a trench coat stood on the other side, his eyes red, his hands shaking. "You have the letter?" He nodded. "Then give it. Let the dead rest, and the living answer." That night, the city's press exploded. Scandal, blackmail, corruption. The letter made its way into the right hands, or the least wrong ones. The case reopened. Lucille's death ruled suspicious. Raymond arrested, but not for murder, for conspiracy, for lies. Father Brown stood at the back of the church, watching the candles burn down. The man from the confessional sat in the last pew, head bowed. "You didn't kill her," Father Brown said, "but you killed the truth for a while. That's a slower kind of murder." "I thought love meant protecting." "It does," Father Brown said softly, "but not from justice." Outside, the rain kept falling, but for the first time in days, it felt like something was being washed away. Not forgotten, but forgiven. Chapter 4. The Woman Who Wore Mourning. It was a Monday soaked in sin, the kind of day where even the clouds seemed hungover. Rain tapped like a metronome against the stained glass windows of St. Aloysius, and the streets outside steamed with the stink of ash, sweat, and gasoline. Father Brown stood in the chapel's side aisle, watching a flickering votive light struggle against the draft. He'd long ago learned that light, like truth, never needed to be loud to be lasting. Just steady. That was when she arrived. She didn't speak at first. She simply stepped into the church, like a song that had been played too many times, familiar, beautiful, and a little warped. The heels of her boots clicked across the stones with measured rhythm, and her dress, black, tailored, too perfect for grief, clung to her like a promise she had no intention of keeping. She sat in the third pew, gloved hands folded, and eyes hidden beneath the brim of a netted hat. She waited until he approached. She didn't pray. "You're Father Brown," she said, her voice low and soft as velvet over broken glass. "I am," he replied. "I've heard you have a way of seeing things others don't." "I try not to," he said gently. "It's usually unpleasant." She gave a half smile, the kind that never reached the eyes. "Then we're in the same line of work." He said nothing. "My name is Evelyn North. My husband was murdered last week, and the police think it was a mugging." "But you don't," Father Brown said. She turned her head slowly. "My husband, Charles, was not the sort of man to get mugged. He carried brass knuckles and suspicion in every pocket. He ran numbers for the Beckett boys. You've heard of them?" "I have," Father Brown said, "but usually in confession." "I want to know who really killed him," she said, "and why." Father Brown looked at her gloved hands, noticed the way they trembled when she wasn't thinking about them. "Why come to a priest?" he asked. "Because priests see what detectives overlook: motives, weakness, regret, all the soft things men kill to protect." "You're not afraid I'll tell the police?" "I'm counting on it." She rose before he could respond, turning with a sweep of her coat. On her way out, she dropped something into the candle box, an old silver locket. Inside, a picture of a young boy with Charles North's jaw and her eyes. Father Brown pocketed it with a sigh. It was never just about the corpse. The North residence was a sleek apartment above a bar called the Red Bishop, a name that had once made Father Brown chuckle and now just made him tired. The bar was full of smoke, sweat, and the clink of empty ambition. He didn't stop there. He climbed the stairs, knocked twice. A maid answered with eyes red from crying and fingers that twisted the edge of her apron. "Miss North isn't here," she whispered. "I'm here for Charles," Father Brown said. She let him in. The place smelled like expensive bourbon and old arguments. The office had 2 chairs, both leather, and cracked at the corners, and one safe, a metal beast left open, papers spilled like entrails. The maid hovered by the door, wringing her hands. "Miss North said not to let anyone see that," she said. "But she wanted me to," Father Brown said. "That's why she dropped the locket." The girl froze. "You knew about the boy," Father Brown added gently. "She kept it quiet," the maid said. "Even Mr. North didn't know. He believed her. The safe was empty of money, but not of secrets. Ledgers, names, numbers, all marked in careful red ink, and tucked in the corner. A receipt for a diamond ring from a jeweler in Midtown, dated 3 days before Charles died. The name on the order wasn't Evelyn. He found the jeweler easily enough. A man with thick fingers and a thicker accent, happy to talk once he recognized the collar. "North was here," he said. "Paid cash. Said it was for a Miss Delaney. Real firecracker. Red hair, voice like dynamite. Never figured he'd buy her something that nice." Father Brown nodded. Neither would his wife. That night, the shadows of the city pressed harder against the windows. Father Brown walked through them as though they were no more than ghosts. He made his way to the Vesper Room, a speakeasy stitched between a pawn shop and a bakery that never seemed open. The doorman gave him a look, then shrugged. Everyone's sins had to start somewhere. Inside, the music pulsed low, all brass and broken dreams. She was there, Delaney, younger than Evelyn, dressed like a flame waiting to burn something down. When Father Brown sat beside her at the bar, she turned without surprise. "Don't tell me," she said. "You're the man with answers." "I prefer questions," Father Brown said. "Then you're already more interesting than Charles was." She sipped her drink, eyes never leaving his. "You were seeing him." "Off and on," she said. "Mostly off. He was a brute. But brutes have wallets, and I had bills." "Did you know he was married?" "I didn't care," she said with a shrug. "Neither did he." Father Brown paused. "Did you kill him?" She laughed. "If I had, I'd have taken the ring." Father Brown studied her for a moment. "Who else wanted him dead?" She looked away, her tone cooling. "Everyone he owed." "Beckett?" "Maybe, or maybe his wife." "You think I'm cold, Father? You should see her when she's angry." Father Brown left without finishing his tea. He didn't need to. He could already taste the bitterness. Detective Marone met him the next morning, outside the coroner's office, wearing a suit that hadn't been pressed since Prohibition, and a tie that looked like it had been used as a handkerchief. "Word is, you're sniffing around the North case," Marone said. "I'm listening," Father Brown replied. "Well, stop," Marone growled. "It's done. Closed. Mugging. Clean. No suspects." "Nothing about it was clean," Father Brown said, "except the cut on his throat." Marone's eyes narrowed. "You think I don't know what a setup looks like?" "I think you know exactly what it looks like. That's why you helped it pass." Marone stepped in close. "This isn't a confessional, priest. You don't get to absolve the city." "No," Father Brown said calmly, "but I can remind it that judgment isn't always delayed." Marone grunted and stalked off. Father Brown watched him go with the quiet patience of a man who'd seen larger beasts fall from smaller slips. He returned to St. Aloysius in the late afternoon, just as the sun finally managed to stab a weak beam through the clouds. Evelyn was there, kneeling, not praying. "Delaney told me about the ring," Father Brown said. Evelyn didn't move. "She said you were cold," he added. "I am," she whispered, "but I didn't kill him." "You hired someone." She looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "Number I just let it happen." "Beckett?" "I told them where he'd be, what time, what route he took to meet Delaney. They said they'd scare him. Just scare him." "You believed them?" She smiled without joy. "I needed to." Father Brown sat beside her. "There's a child," he said, holding out the locket. "He's yours." She nodded, barely. "You wanted justice," he said. "But what you wanted more was to stop being powerless." She wiped her eyes. "I thought if Charles were gone, I could be free." "You're not," he said. "Not yet." They turned her in the next day, not for murder, but for conspiracy. The Beckett men were rounded up, though Marone vanished before the ink dried. Delaney left town. The boy went to Evelyn's sister, upstate. Father Brown stayed behind, lighting a candle for a soul that hadn't found rest and for a city that never really tried. Outside, the rain began again, slow, relentless, cleansing in the way only sorrow could be. Chapter 5. Smoke over St. Michael's. It was the smoke that reached him first. thin, bitter threads slinking through the chapel's stone ribs like a serpent through the garden. Father Brown had smelled enough fires to know this one wasn't accidental. This wasn't incense or the waft of cheap candles left to gutter too long. This was malice, scorched and left behind like a signature. By the time he stepped outside, into the alley behind St. Michael's, the sauce had already gone cold. Just a black smear on the rear brick wall, the remnants of what looked like charred paper, and something more deliberate, an oil-soaked rag, half-burned and still smouldering. The city hissed with fog and early morning drizzle, neon signs dying into pale ghosts as the day struggled to rise. He bent down and sniffed the ash. Not gasoline, lamp oil, a poor man's arson, or a clever man's misdirection. The note came an hour later, tucked into the mailbox with no stamp and no sender. Typed on a borrowed machine. "Stay out of it, Father, or the next fire won't miss." It didn't say what it was, but the threat was clear. He folded the paper carefully, slid it into his coat pocket, and returned to the sanctuary, where the only flames were safe behind stained glass and the mutter of prayer. That afternoon, a woman came into the church, wearing grief-like perfume, too thick, too practiced. She moved with poise, but not sorrow. Her dress was black, but the hem had never touched a funeral home. She sat near the front, looked at the altar like it owed her something. When Father Brown approached, she turned and offered a tight smile that didn't belong in any house of God. "You're Father Brown," she said, as though testing whether the rumors were true. "I am," he replied. "And you are?" "Vivian Lorenz. My brother was buried from this church last week. Alec Lorenz." The name struck like a low chord. Alec had been a volunteer, occasional choir singer, youth counselor, the sort of man you could trust with keys and confessions. He'd died of a fall, they'd said. Slipped from the choir loft after evening service. Nothing suspicious, just tragic. "My condolences," Father Brown said softly. Vivian's smile vanished. "Don't waste them. Alec wasn't supposed to die, and he didn't fall. Someone pushed him." He waited. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph, grainy, taken from a distance. It showed Alec standing near a man in a trench coat in the alley behind St. Michael's. The figure was half-turned, but the posture was angry, shoulders coiled like a spring. "He'd been meeting someone," Vivian said. "Kept it secret. Said he was trying to fix something. I think he got too close to something that didn't want fixing. And you came to me because the police are bought and blind, and because Alec trusted you. He said once that you see things no one else does, that you know what people look like when they're lying to themselves." Father Brown looked at the photograph again. "Do you? Do I what? Lie to yourself." Her eyes went cold. "Only when I have to." She left without asking him to help. She didn't need to. The smoke had already asked for her. That night, he visited the choir loft. The rail where Alec had fallen was still loose, but only just. Someone had loosened it deliberately, then tightened it just enough to pass inspection. A careful death. Planned. Executed. Alec had seen something, maybe known too much, and now Father Brown needed to know what it was. The trail led to the west side, where the city stopped pretending to care. He found Alec's last known address in a crumbling tenement above a butcher shop that sold more rumors than meat. The landlady barely looked up from her paper. "Rent's paid through the month," she said, "and he never brought girls in. Quiet, polite, too polite maybe." His room was small, neat, no secrets in the open. But Father Brown knew where guilt liked to hide. Under the mattress, he found a slim folder wrapped in a grocery bag. Inside were documents, copies of receipts, lists, a crude map of the block surrounding St. Michael's, and one name circled in red ink: Inspector Harlan Deuce. Deuce was an old name with new power, a cop who'd risen fast and forgotten even faster who he used to be. He kept his uniform clean and his record cleaner, but the whispers behind his back weren't so tidy. Father Brown studied the documents, saw the pattern Alec had begun to uncover: extortion, money laundering, envelopes passed in back pews and alleyways, protection fees run through shell charities, all of it orbiting the parish like vultures circling a confessional. He returned to the church late, the sky bruised and the streets humming with bad dreams. In the back office, he lit a candle and waited. He knew he wouldn't be waiting long. The door creaked. Heavy footsteps. A figure stepped in, trench coat dripping. "You've been busy," Harlan Deuce said, voice like gravel under boot heel. "You should have stayed out of it, Father." "I tried," Father Brown said. "But the fire changed things. You poking around Alec Lorenz's apartment changed things." "Alec tried to stop you," Father Brown said. "He wanted to clean up something he saw was dirty." "He was a fool," Deuce said, "and you'll end up the same." "No," Father Brown said, quietly, "because fools are innocent. You're something worse." Deuce stepped closer, pulled out a pistol, not aimed, just displayed, a symbol, not yet a sentence. "You think a collar makes you untouchable," he said. "No," Father Brown replied, "just harder to bury quietly." The tension hung like fog, but Deuce didn't fire. The gun shook slightly. His breath was shallow. "I was good once," Deuce said suddenly. "Before the rot, before the orders came from below instead of above. You think I liked doing this?" "No," Father Brown said. "But you liked what it brought you. Power, control, the illusion of justice without the weight of mercy. You're not going to stop me." "I don't need to," Father Brown said. "The truth already has." He tossed the folder onto the desk. Copies. Enough to crack Deuce's life wide open. Enough to bring the press, the public, and the pure kind of heat. "You've got one choice left," Father Brown said. "Make a confession, or be condemned." Deuce looked at the file, then at the priest. Then the gun slid back into his coat, like a man hiding a sin he could no longer stomach. "I didn't kill Alec," he said, "but I told someone to scare him, someone who went too far." "Names," Father Brown said. "Johnny Calder, one of Beckett's boys. He's the match that lit the fire behind your chapel too." Father Brown nodded. "Thank you." "I'm not asking for absolution," Deuce said. "You couldn't carry it if I gave it to you," Father Brown replied. By morning, Deuce had turned himself in. The scandal broke like a dam. Calder was picked up trying to run, fingers still inked from handling bribe envelopes. Vivian came back to the church one last time. This time, her mourning was real. "He told me once he wanted to be a detective," she said. "Said the world needed someone who could see evil and still believe in good." "He was right," Father Brown said. She looked at the sanctuary, the candles, the cross. "And what do you believe in, Father?" "In sin," he said softly, "and the grace that waits behind it." She left with tears that didn't need an audience. Outside, the air still smelled faintly of smoke, but the sky was clearing. One sliver of light over the steeple of St. Michael's, thin as a promise. Chapter 6. A corpse beneath the lamplight. The rain hadn't let up in 2 days. It fell steady and slow, like the city itself was sweating out a fever it didn't know how to break. The streetlights were halos cast through fog, buzzing yellow and bruised by shadow, and the sidewalks shimmered with the slick sheen of spilled oil and secrets no one had cleaned up. Father Brown stood beneath the awning of St. Christopher's, umbrella folded at his side, and stared across the avenue at the body, slumped beneath the lamplight. It wasn't the first time he'd seen death wear its face in public, but something about the way the man lay, arms flopped open, one shoe missing, head turned toward the church steps like he was reaching for salvation, told him this was more than just murder. This was a message. Someone wanted it read. The uniformed officer keeping the scene looked barely old enough to shave. He stepped aside when Father Brown approached, eyes darting down at the priest's collar. Then, up again, as if trying to place him in a box he didn't have. "You a relative?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "No," Father Brown said, "but I might know why he died." The corpse was middle-aged, decently dressed, though the tie had been yanked loose and his overcoat was soaked through. There was a wallet still in his inner pocket, odd for a mugging, and no blood that Father Brown could see, just the angle of the neck, broken clean. A quick snap from behind, or a hard fall. It was hard to tell, but either way, the man hadn't seen it coming. "What's his name?" Father Brown asked the officer. "Edward Moxley, lawyer. Used to work downtown before he moved into private practice, office near Halstead," and Seventh Father Brown nodded. Moxley was a name that had passed through parish halls more than once, mostly whispered and followed by words like embezzler or fixer, the kind of man who didn't ask where the money came from as long as it stayed warm in his pockets. But people like that didn't just die in front of churches, unless they were trying to say something on their way out, or unless someone else wanted them to. The rain thickened as he walked back across the avenue, shoes splashing through puddles, collar tight against the wind. He made it to St. Christopher's just in time to catch the tail end of matins. A few old women were still scattered in the pews, muttering prayers like they were scrubbing floors. Father Brown slipped into the side aisle and knelt for a moment. He wasn't praying for Moxley. Not yet. He was trying to remember what kind of sin fit the shape of that death. The woman came that afternoon, just as the clouds parted briefly to let in a thin shaft of light that didn't warm anything. She walked into the parish office dressed in black. Not morning black, but fashion black. The kind that said she knew exactly how she looked and didn't care who else noticed. Her heels clicked like a ticking clock across the tiled floor. "I assume your father, Brown," she said, cool as a cocktail and twice as smooth. "You assume correctly," he replied without rising. "And you are?" "Caroline Moxley, widow." He studied her face. It was pale, but not drawn. Not grief then, something else. Anger, maybe, or fear, dressed up as indignation. "My husband was found outside your church this morning," she said. "I came to ask if you saw anything." "Only what was left," he said. Her gaze didn't waver. "I don't expect sympathy. Edward wasn't a saint." "No, Father," Brown said, folding his hands, "but saints aren't the only ones who deserve truth." She lowered herself into the chair across from him with practiced ease, crossing her legs like she was settling into a negotiation. He'd been meeting someone, a client, he said. Late hours, odd places. Then last night, he said he had to go out again. Wouldn't say who, just slipped on his coat and left. Was he nervous? He was always nervous, she said. But last night, yes, something was different. Did he take anything with him? "A briefcase," she said. "Black. Leather. I didn't see it with him when they found the body. Father Brown nodded. Did he keep records? Not written. He said paper was dangerous. Then he was afraid. Of what? She asked. Of who? Father Brown corrected. She rose to leave, but hesitated. He wasn't a good man, Father, but he didn't deserve that. No, Father Brown said. No one does. The office on Halstead was dark when he got there, but not locked. That was the first clue. The second was the way the lamp on the desk had been knocked sideways. The third was the smell. Cigarettes, sharp and recent. Someone had been here since the police had taken their pictures. Maybe someone who didn't want to be found. He stepped inside quietly, eyes adjusting to the gloom. Papers were strewn, drawers forced open. But it wasn't a robbery, not really. Whoever had come wasn't looking for valuables. They were looking for one thing. The briefcase. In the corner, by the wastebasket, was a burnt corner of a document. Not all the way gone. He picked it up with care. The edge of a page, yellowed and fragile, with the name Gordon Bexley typed near the top. That name he knew. Bexley was the city's favorite false philanthropist, ran charities by day, rackets by night, paid for soup kitchens with the same hand that fed bribes to judges. If Moxley had evidence on Bexley, it explained the fear. It explained the death. The next step was a risk, but Father Brown never minded risks that served the truth. He walked straight into Bexley's club just after sunset, past the bouncers and the smoke and the whispering jazz. He sat at the bar and waited, and within minutes, a man in a charcoal suit was sliding into the seat beside him. Either you're brave, Father, the man said, or you're lost. Sometimes it's the same thing, Father Brown said. Tell Mr. Bexley I'd like a word. The man didn't move. And what makes you think Bexley wants to talk? I know what Moxley had, Father Brown said, or enough of it. That earned a twitch, a subtle shift of the eyes. Wait here, the man said. Father Brown didn't wait long. A side door opened, and he was ushered into a private room. Bexley stood behind a mahogany desk, drink in hand, suit immaculate. Father Brown, he said, like he was greeting an unwelcome ghost, you're persistent. I try to be, Father Brown said. It's one of the few things the church encourages. Bexley smirked. Let me guess. You're here about Moxley. I'm here about the truth, Father Brown said. Same thing some days. Moxley was a liability. You get enough of those, you start pruning the tree. Did you kill him? No, Bexley said calmly, but I didn't stop it either. Father Brown nodded slowly. You let the sin grow until it bloomed. He was going to burn us all, Bexley said. Had records, names, payoffs. He wanted out, but he wanted leverage first. Problem is, leverage makes enemies. Father Brown leaned forward, and guilt makes corpses. Bexley's smile faltered. You won't stop this, he said. No, Father Brown said, but the truth will. He stood and left without another word. The next day, the briefcase was found in a locker at Central Station. Anonymous tip. Inside were files, tapes, enough to drag Bexley's empire into the light. The press had a field day. Bexley vanished, but not forever. The kind of man he was always showed up again, somewhere. At Moxley's funeral, Caroline sat in the front pew, dry-eyed. After the service, she approached Father Brown. You found it, didn't you? Yes. Did you read it? I read enough. She paused. Will it matter? Only if we let it, he said. Sin doesn't vanish when it's exposed. It just loses its power. She nodded. I didn't love him, but I didn't want him to die. No one ever does, Father Brown said. But love isn't the only reason we fight for the dead. Sometimes we do it because someone has to. She left without looking back. Father Brown turned toward the altar, knelt once more. The rain was gone, but the streets outside still shimmered beneath the lamplight, and he knew they would again. Not because the city was clean, but because the dark never stopped trying, and neither would he. Chapter 7. The Whispering Gargoyle. The storm had rolled in slow, as if the city had invited it on purpose. It washed the filth from the gutters, but left the sins untouched, settled deeper in the cracks between bricks and beneath the stones of old churches. From the bell tower of St. Gertrude's, Father Brown watched lightning fork across the sky, each flash illuminating the rain-slick streets in stuttering glimpses. Down below, a stone gargoyle hunched over the corner of the roof, its grotesque grin frozen in time, as though it knew secrets it would never share. Or perhaps it already had. The note had arrived that morning, delivered not through the post, but slid beneath the church door in a plain envelope that had been folded twice and smelled faintly of clove cigarettes. Inside was a single sentence, typed unevenly on an old machine. He didn't fall. He was pushed. Ask the gargoyle. The rest was silence. Father Brown didn't believe in omens, but he did believe in fear. And the person who had written that message was afraid. The gargoyle, of course, was only stone, but stone had a habit of bearing witness, especially from the highest places, where few looked up and fewer climbed. The death had happened 3 nights prior. A man named Cyril Dandridge, former banker, once wealthy, recently ruined, was found in the courtyard behind the church. His skull cracked like an eggshell against the paving stones. The official line was suicide. He'd leapt from the tower after losing everything in a series of speculative ventures that had more holes than coins. The police, lazy and half-bought, closed the case with the kind of haste that smelled worse than the corpse. But Father Brown had seen the scene. Dandridge didn't jump. There was no weight in his shoes, no despair in his folded coat. He'd been carrying an umbrella, for God's sake. People planning to die didn't bring umbrellas. That night, Father Brown climbed the bell tower again, this time not to watch the rain, but to study the ledge. The gargoyle loomed in the corner, rainwater running down its chipped jaw. He stood near it, measured the space. A man could stand there, certainly. A second could crouch behind. It would be a simple thing to push, one strong shove, one scream swallowed by thunder. And there, half tucked between the gargoyle's claws, was a scrap of torn fabric. Wool, dark and damp. Too small to be from a coat, too fine for accident. A glove, perhaps, or part of a sleeve. He took it gently and slipped it into his pocket. Stone might not talk, but sometimes it held on to the words left behind. The next day, a woman came to the rectory wearing a veil that didn't hide much. Her perfume arrived before she did, thick with roses and something sharper beneath. She moved with the grace of someone used to having doors opened for her, though not always by choice. "Father Brown," she said, her voice like smoke curling from a long-held cigarette, "you're investigating my husband's death." "Your husband was Cyril Dandridge," he replied. "Ex-husband," she corrected, pulling the veil up. Her eyes were cold blue, her smile practiced. "Though that's a technicality now, isn't it?" He nodded once. "And you are?" "Claudine. Claudine Dandridge, née Shaw. Perhaps you've heard of me." "I read obituaries more often than society pages." She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Cyril was a fool," she said. "He built his fortune on lies, and then tried to buy redemption when the lies turned on. Him? You believe he killed himself? I believe he lost everything and couldn't bear to live with it. It wouldn't surprise me if he saw this church as some final hope. And yet, Father Brown said, you came to see me, not the police. Her smile faltered. Just briefly. I wanted to know if you'd found anything. For closure, you're not here for closure, he said gently. You're here because you think someone else might be looking. She stood abruptly. You presume too much, Father. It's what I do, he said. I presume there's truth in every lie and sin in every silence. She left with a flurry of fabric and tension that lingered in the air long after the door shut. He watched her go from the window, disappearing into a waiting car, driven by a man with a neck too thick for Sunday school. Father Brown visited Dandridge's former office next. It had been gutted, the furniture repossessed, and the safe left open like a mouth that had screamed its last. But the neighbors remembered the man, some with pity, most with anger. He cheated decent men, said the owner of the pawn shop downstairs, took their savings and called it investment. That's not business. That's theft in a better suit. And yet, there were other stories. A janitor mentioned a girl, a secretary, who had left 2 weeks before Dandridge's death. Smart, quiet. Her name was Teresa Hill. He found her in a boarding house near the river, her room neat and sparse. She didn't want to talk at first, until he mentioned the gargoyle. Then her hands began to shake. I saw them arguing, she whispered, the night before he died. Cyril and another man, on the stairs leading to the tower. I was late leaving and heard voices. They were shouting about money, about someone named Shaw, Claudine's family, Father Brown said. Teresa nodded. He said he had something that could ruin them. Papers. He said he wasn't going down alone. Did you see the other man? Number just a shadow. Big, heavy steps, not like Cyril's. Father Brown left quietly, leaving behind a promise to tell no one her name. Some truths lived longer when they weren't tied to the innocent. He returned to the tower one more time, this time with the torn fabric. He matched it to the rail where the struggle would have taken place. Then he made one more call. 2 hours later, Claudine returned, this time without her veil, but with a lawyer at her side. He was tall, grey, and silent. You found something, she said. Yes, Father Brown said. I found that your ex-husband was blackmailing you, that he knew something about your family's accounts, specifically the ones tied to offshore investments and charitable fronts that never quite donated. I found that someone pushed him from the tower, and I suspect it was someone who didn't like being seen in the light. You can't prove anything, the lawyer said, finally finding his voice. No, Father Brown said, but the truth doesn't need proof. It just needs time. The silence that followed was heavy. Then Claudine laughed, bitter and dry. You're dangerous, Father, but not to me. No, he said, to those who think sin can stay secret forever. She left again, but this time the lawyer stayed behind. My client is protected, he said. For now, Father Brown replied, but protection isn't the same as peace. The next morning, an anonymous letter arrived at the city's major paper. Inside, financial records. Enough to sink the Shaw fortune and expose years of fraud. A quiet retraction followed in the society column. Mrs. Claudine Dandridge to retire from public life indefinitely. Father Brown stood once more at the base of the tower, looking up at the gargoyle. The rain had stopped, but the stone still glistened with the memory of it. The whispering gargoyle said nothing now, but Father Brown didn't need it to. He had heard enough. Some truths didn't need to scream to be heard. They just needed someone who was still listening. Chapter 8. Ashes on the Altar. The smoke was already curling up from the nave when Father Brown arrived at St. Agnes before dawn. He could smell it before he saw it. Charred incense, melted wax, and the sharp, unnatural tang of scorched varnish. He pushed through the heavy front doors to find the sanctuary not in flames, but desecrated. The altar cloth was blackened, one of the candlesticks twisted from the heat, and in the center of it all, sitting where the sacrament should have been, was a pile of fine ash and bone. It hadn't been a fire set to destroy the church. No, this was smaller, crueler. It was a message. He walked forward quietly, his steps echoing in the emptiness. The stained glass windows glowed faintly with the weak morning light, but inside, the air was thick and sour. He bent over the altar, studying the ash. Human, he thought at once. Not much, but enough. A fingertip bone, a sliver of jaw. The body had been burned somewhere else and brought here in pieces. It wasn't sacrilege, it was theater. Someone wanted attention and confession. By the time the police arrived, the ash had cooled, but Father Brown's thoughts had not. He stood to the side while they asked questions and took photographs they wouldn't understand. They called it gang stuff, street messages, the kind of thing that happened when money changed hands faster than bullets. But Father Brown knew the difference between a warning and a cry for help. He also knew there was more than one kind of fire, and most of them started in the soul long before they reached the flesh. The church had no enemies worth burning, but someone who used to love it, someone with a reason to call on the divine with fury, might have done something just like this. That was where sin lived, after all. Not in chaos, in the corners of broken faith. The next visitor came just past noon. She was tall, dressed in a dark grey coat, with buttons that gleamed like false halos. She had a face that had once been soft, but now bore the tight lines of self-preservation. Her gloved hands trembled, though her voice didn't. "I need to speak to you," she said, not waiting for an invitation. He nodded. "Please." She didn't sit. "My name is Lorna Kessler. I think my sister was burned on your altar." Father Brown blinked. "I'm sorry. Why would you think that?" "She's missing," Lorna said, voice flat now, almost resigned. "Her name was June. She worked at the Arcadia Club." That place again. He knew the Arcadia, dark velvet booths, cigarette girls with eyes like razors, jazz soaked in gin, a playground for politicians who didn't want to be seen, and businessmen who paid extra not to be remembered. "She disappeared 2 nights ago," Lorna said. "No note, no bag, just gone. I went to the police, and they said girls like her disappear all the time." "Did she have enemies?" Lorna laughed bitterly. "She had clients. Is that the same thing?" "Sometimes," Father Brown said. "Was she afraid?" "She'd stopped talking," Lorna said. "That's how I knew something was wrong." He watched her closely. She wasn't grieving. She was bracing. "Why come to me?" "She was raised Catholic," she said. "We both were. She still had her cross, wore it when she wasn't on stage. If she died, she'd want someone to see her, even if she couldn't say it herself." Father Brown nodded. "And what about you, Miss Kessler? What do you want?" She looked away, then back. "Revenge," she said. "But I'll settle for truth." That night, he walked into the Arcadia like a shadow, with purpose. The neon sign buzzed above the door, red and cruel against the mist. Inside, the music was slow and low, but the noise wasn't what filled the room. It was the silence underneath, the way people looked without seeing, drank without tasting. The place reeked of forgetting. The club manager was a man named Ellison, sharp-suited and sharper-tongued, with a handshake like a loaded dice. "Father Brown," he said, raising an eyebrow, "didn't think we had your kind in this part of town." "We all have our own kind," Father Brown replied. "Some just wear it better." Ellison chuckled. "You here to save someone?" "No," he said. "I'm here because someone wasn't saved. June Kessler. She worked here." Ellison stiffened. Hadn't seen her in a few days. Figured she ran off with a customer. "Happens." "She didn't run," Father Brown said. "You got proof?" "She left ashes on my altar." Ellison went quiet. Not out of guilt, out of calculation. Then he leaned in, all pretense gone. "You don't know who you're dealing with, Father. This goes higher than me. People who make people like me disappear when we ask too many questions." "Then maybe you've asked too few." He left before Ellison could reply. That was the trick. Get them to answer you later, when they thought no one was listening. Because in places like that, people only spoke freely to ghosts and priests. He was followed on the way home. He didn't need to see them to know. Two men, a car back, walking like they had somewhere to be, and no alibi if they were caught. He ducked into an alley near St. Jude's, let the darkness press in. When the first man rounded the corner, Father Brown was already there, coat spread wide like wings of shadow. "I don't carry a gun," he said, "and I don't run." The thug blinked. The second caught up and scowled. "You asking for a miracle, Padre?" "No," Father Brown said softly. "I'm offering one." They hesitated. No threat, no bluff, just certainty. "Tell your boss," he said, "that if I stop asking questions, the truth won't stop with me. It will find its way through someone else. It always does." One of them spat near his feet. "You talk big for a man in a collar." "I talk just loud enough," Father Brown said, "because you don't know yet how scared you are." They left him there. He let them. 2 days later, the papers ran a story about a city councilman caught with a false identity, a missing girl's necklace in his drawer, and blood-stained clothes, hidden in a charity bin. The councilman's name was Brandt. He had ties to Ellison, ties to the Arcadia, and, most notably, a weekly tithe to Saint Agnes that had stopped suddenly, just days before the ashes arrived. Father Brown was in his office when Lorna returned. This time, she didn't wear gloves. "They arrested him," she said. "I know." "Do you think it was him?" Father Brown nodded. "I think he wanted to scare her, make her quiet. But people like him don't understand that silence speaks too." "She was my sister," Lorna whispered. "I wasn't there." "No," Father Brown said. "But you heard her. That's more than most do." She left something on the desk before she went. June's crucifix. The chain bent, the charm dulled with age. He placed it on the altar where the ashes had been, lit a single candle beside it. The church still smelled faintly of smoke, but not the kind that destroys, the kind that lingers, that reminds. He stood in the silence a long time, watching the flame, and listening for voices not yet silenced by sin. Chapter 9. The clock struck. Guilt. The rain that night came down like a confession. Slow at first, hesitant, and then all at once, pouring from the heavens with the weight of something long repressed. The city glistened under it, streets soaked in shadow and regret, neon signs twitching in the wet air like dying promises. Father Brown walked alone through that slick maze of alleyways and dripping rooftops, the hem of his cassock gathering grime, his small, round umbrella bobbing above him like a halo knocked askew. He'd just finished hearing confessions at St. Mary's, and he was thinking about silence. Not the kind that filled the confessional booth, but the kind that followed a lie that had just been told. At precisely 10 o'clock, the old bell tower above South Market struck its hour. The sound carried over the rooftops, deep and metallic, always a second slower than the world around it, always a beat behind the city's heart. He glanced up instinctively as he heard it, and that was when the scream came. It didn't last long, just one sharp cry, cut off as suddenly as it began. Female, young, probably. From somewhere near the abandoned warehouse, across from the old rail yard, a place that once held shipments of iron and now just held echoes and bad decisions. He turned on instinct and hurried toward it, boots splashing in puddles, breath slow and steady. The city's sickness didn't frighten him. It merely saddened him. He arrived to find the street empty, but the warehouse, door, rusted, warped, and long forgotten, was ajar. Inside, the smell hit him first. Wet wood, rust, and the acrid tang of fear. And blood. There was a smear of it across the floor, leading deeper into the darkness. He followed without hesitation, past broken crates and rotted beams, until he found her. A woman, unconscious but breathing, tied to a pillar, with cords that had once held freight and now held something much smaller and more fragile. Her mouth was gagged with a scarf, her wrists bruised and raw. She stirred as he approached, eyes fluttering open with a jolt of panic. "Easy," he said, gently removing the gag. "You're safe now." She blinked, struggling for words. "He said he was going to come back. He said if I screamed again—" "You didn't scream," Father Brown said softly. "Not after the first time. He's not here now." She looked at him, uncertain. "You're a priest?" "Unfortunately for him, yes." Her name was Clara Voss, singer, lounge act. She'd been missing for 2 days. Her last known performance had been at a place called the Blue Parrot, a bar with a bad reputation and worse lighting. She hadn't gone home after her set. Her roommate filed a report. The police assumed she'd left town with a man. That's what they always assumed. But Clara said she'd been lured. A man told her he had information about her father. Something from years ago. Something important. "My father died when I was 7, she said. "Suicide. Or that's what they told me. He worked for the city, in records. But there was something off. He left no note, no signs. And one night, he just didn't come home." "And this man?" Father Brown asked. "What did he say his name was?" "He didn't," she said, "but he wore a watch." Father Brown raised an eyebrow. "A watch?" "Yes," Clara said. "Big, old, silver face. It ticked so loud I could hear it even when he wasn't speaking." That struck something in Father Brown's mind, a memory half buried beneath years of sermons and cigarette smoke. There was a man who wore a watch like that, always on the outside of his sleeve, like it was more important than the time it kept. Detective Silas Renner, a city man. Crooked, maybe. Brilliant, definitely. Renner had once been the golden boy of internal affairs, until he wasn't. Rumor had it he still worked jobs, quiet ones, for men who needed secrets kept under cement instead of in files. Renner had been friends with a man named Voss once, knew his family, might have known something worth killing. For Father Brown walked the rainy stretch to the Blue Parrot the next night. Inside, the air was thick with jazz and indifference. The bartender poured whiskey like it was medicine, and conversation like it was poison. When Father Brown stepped through the door, heads turned, but only briefly. The city was used to seeing priests in odd places. Lost souls went looking for them when the hour got late enough. Rena was at the back, nursing a glass and reading a folded newspaper like it was a courtroom transcript. He looked up slowly, lips curling into a dry smirk. "Didn't think you'd come here, Father." "People rarely do," Father Brown replied. "But it's where the sins hide." Rena gestured to the seat across from him. "What do you think you're doing? Poking your nose in things that stink?" "I hear confessions," Father Brown said, sitting. "Even the ones nobody wants to give." Rena sipped his drink. "You found the girl." "Yes. And now you're here to save me?" "No," Father Brown said. "To warn you." Rena blinked. "About what?" "Guilt," Father Brown said, voice low. "It's louder than a ticking watch, and it's always on time." Rena leaned back. "I didn't lay a hand on that girl." "But you sent her the message." "I wanted answers," Rena said. "I wanted to know what Voss told her before he died." "He didn't die," Father Brown said. "He was murdered, and the clock you wear ticked through every second of the cover-up." Rena's eyes flashed. "You don't know what you are talking about." "You're right," Father Brown said. "I don't know, but guilt does, and you're still listening to it, aren't you?" Rena stood, slow and stiff. "You'd better leave." "I will," Father Brown said, rising. "But so will the truth. It never stays buried long, not even under cement." Rena didn't respond, but his hands shook as he reached for the check. Father Brown returned to St. Mary's in the dead of night. The bell above the church struck midnight, and with each toll he thought about the way time unraveled the lies we wrap around our crimes. By the seventh toll, he knew what to do. The next morning, he met with Clara at the station. He gave her a sealed envelope, told her to wait. Then he went to the press. Not the big papers, the small one. The one with a reputation for printing what others wouldn't. Inside the envelope were copies of Voss's city records, quietly removed years ago by an anonymous clerk with a conscience. They told the story of a man who had uncovered corruption, a man who reported it, a man who disappeared soon after, declared a suicide with no autopsy. That story hit the newsstands before noon. By nightfall, Rena was gone, his apartment ransacked, his office cleared. Some said he fled. Others said someone silenced him. Father Brown didn't speculate. He only stood in the sanctuary as the bells struck again, the same deep chime it always had. But this time, it sounded like something else, like justice, or maybe just guilt. Finally, on time. Chapter 10. Cigarettes and Psalms. The cigarette smoke in the confessional was the first sign something wasn't right. It was the kind of sin that clung to walls and fingers, not because it was grand, but because it was casual, careless, in the way only real guilt can be. Father Brown sat silently in his side of the booth, listening to the soft draw and exhale from the other side, waiting for the penitent to speak. But no voice came. Just that slow rhythm. Inhale, hold, exhale, the ghost of tobacco hanging in the stale air between them. He knew who it was, before the whisper finally slid through the grate. "Father," the voice said, low and rasping, "I've done something I can't confess." "You just did," Father Brown said calmly. There was a pause, long enough for the cigarette to burn down further. Then a chuckle, dry, bitter. "She's gone," the voice said. "Disappeared 3 nights ago. But it's not what it looks like." "Is it ever?" "Her name's Eloise, singer at the Candlelight Club. Used to read psalms backstage, between numbers, said it helped her breathe. but breathing didn't help her in the end. There was a click as the cigarette was extinguished. "You'll find her," the voice said. "I made sure of that." And then the figure slipped out of the booth and into the shadows of St. Jerome's, leaving behind nothing but the fading scent of ash and regret. Father Brown waited a moment, then stepped out into the flickering candlelight of the nave, the city's low hum leaking in, through the stained glass and the cracked stone. He didn't need to chase the man. He would follow the trail of silence he always left behind. The Candlelight Club sat hunched between a pawnshop and a gambling parlor just off Donnelly Street, a marquee blinking half its name in red neon and the other half drowned in shadow. Inside, the air was velvet thick, and the band played like they were trying to outdrink their own music. Father Brown stepped through the front like a ghost wearing someone else's shoes. Nobody stopped him. They never did. She wasn't on stage. That much was expected. But her dressing room was still there, still marked with her name in gold-peeled letters, the scent of cheap perfume, and better memories still clinging to the edges of the mirror. Father Brown found her Bible open on the vanity, Psalms underlined in red pencil. Next to it was a crumpled cigarette pack, lipstick smudged across one end. Not her brand. He asked the bartender, a weary-eyed man named Nico, with a stammer and a habit of cleaning glasses that were already clean. "She had a visitor that night," Nico said. "Tall, wore gloves, didn't order a drink, just stood in the back like he owned the shadows, left after her last set. She followed." "Where to?" "Didn't say, but she left her coat." That was when the man with the badge showed up. Lieutenant Cal Donovan, crooked as a corkscrew and just as unpredictable. He used to shake down smugglers for half their take and donate the rest to church, charities, said it made the math work. "You're sticking your nose in again," Donovan said, brushing past. "Only when something starts to stink," Father Brown replied. "You think this girl's dead?" "I think she vanished," he said, "and people only vanish when someone else wants them to." Donovan's jaw twitched. "You think I had something to do with it?" "I think you're standing too close to the fire not to feel the heat." Donovan didn't like that, but he didn't argue, just left with a growl and a warning about where priests didn't belong. Father Brown followed the trail where it always led, inward, then downward. He spoke to the piano player, who remembered a note Eloise hummed during rehearsal, one she never sang on stage. He spoke to the janitor, who found a gold crucifix in the trash bin behind the club, snapped in two. And he spoke to a blind beggar who sat outside the back alley and knew footsteps like others, knew names. "She didn't walk," the beggar said. "She was carried." "Alive?" "No," he said. "She wasn't breathing right." That led him to the river, not because he expected to find her, but because that's where people were always found when their stories were meant to be buried. Sure enough, 3 days later, she washed up beneath the 8th Street Bridge. Cold, bloated, beautiful in that final tragic way only innocence, robbed too early, could be. But Father Brown didn't weep. Not yet. The city hummed with gossip. Suicide, they whispered. Another girl who dreamed too big and died too small. But Father Brown saw the bruises under her arms, the scratch on her neck, the red pencil marking the last psalm she read, Psalm 69. "Deliver me out of the mire and let me not sink." That wasn't a cry for death. That was a prayer for rescue. The coroner's report called it inconclusive. The club manager claimed ignorance, but that cigarette, the one left in the booth, was a brand called Taros, imported, rare, and only one man in the precinct smoked them. Father Brown found Donovan in the back of a deli on Morris Street, eating a sandwich like it owed him money. He slid into the booth without a word. "You don't have a warrant," Donovan said. "I have a calling," Father Brown replied. "You going to try to convert me?" "You've already been converted, just not to anything holy." Donovan laughed. "You've got nothing, Father." "I've got guilt," Father Brown said. "The kind that hangs around like the smoke from your tarots. The kind that fills a confessional even when you say, 'Nothing.'" Donovan leaned in, menace flickering behind his eyes. "You think I killed her?" "I think you let her die," Father Brown said, "because she knew something. Something about the city's redevelopment fund. Something about the bribes you took and the land her father died trying to protect." Donovan didn't speak. "She found the papers," Father Brown said. "Her father left them hidden in a psalter. She wanted to go public. You wanted her to shut up." Donovan's hand moved toward his coat. "I wouldn't," Father Brown said. "Not because I'm armed, but because you're not ready to answer what happens after." The hand froze. Slowly, it dropped. "She was going to ruin everything," Donovan muttered. "I was months away from getting out clean." "No one ever gets out clean," Father Brown said. "We all carry something. The question is whether it's heavy enough to make us fall." Donovan stood, slow and stiff. "You can't prove it." "I don't have to," Father Brown said, "but I think you already have." That night, Donovan turned himself in, not because he wanted to, but because the silence had grown too loud. The psalms Eloise used to hum were played at her funeral, and the club closed down a week later, draped in darkness and guilt. Father Brown lit a candle at the altar and watched the flame dance in the draught from the city's breath. Outside, the rain still came and went, washing the blood, but not the sin. The streets never stopped smoking, the psalms never stopped whispering, and the truth never stopped rising, slow and relentless, like incense before God. Chapter 11. A Truth Written in Dust. The dust was thick in the old bookstore on Holloway Street, the kind that doesn't come from neglect, but from secrecy. It clung to every spine like a whisper, and hung in the air with the weight of words no one dared read aloud. Father Brown stood just inside the threshold, the bells above the door having long since rusted silent, and let the stale air wrap around him. The place had once belonged to Peter Mallory, a man known more for what he didn't sell than what he did. Bibles with hollowed pages, ledgers disguised as first editions, and one night ago he'd vanished like a misplaced comma in a paragraph full of sins. The back room was where the smell changed. It was faint but unmistakable, old smoke, not from a fire, but a gun. The kind of shot that had no echo, only consequence. There was no body, no blood, no signs of struggle, but a trail of fine soot, dusted across the wooden floor, led behind the bookshelf to a false wall cracked open just enough for a man with secrets to slip through, or be dragged. The woman came at dusk, tall, fur-draped, with lips painted like a fresh wound, and a cigarette between fingers that didn't tremble nearly enough. Her name, she said, was Lenora Vale, the kind of name that belonged in fading hotel registers and court depositions. She said she was a client once of Mr. Mallory, that he'd been helping her recover documents, old deeds, something about family property lost in a crooked city deal. But Father Brown could already see the shape of the lie beneath her story. She didn't come looking for justice. She came to make sure no one else found it. "You're not the police," she said, eyes scanning the chapel office like she was waiting for a wire to trip. You're something else. What exactly? I'm a priest, Father Brown said. The kind people come to after the lies stop working. She smiled slowly. And what makes you think I'm lying? I don't think you are, he said. I know you are, but only because you're afraid of what telling the truth might cost. She flinched, just barely, but it was enough. Peter's dead, isn't he? She said, more a statement than a question. I don't know, Father Brown said, but he's certainly gone, and he didn't take his secrets with him. The ledger had been hidden in the false wall. It was written in shorthand, coded, with symbols tucked into margins like prayers misquoted. But Father Brown had seen this kind of cipher before, back when another man, in another parish, thought money could cleanse guilt better than water or absolution. What the ledger detailed was bigger than missing deeds. It was a list of payoffs, laundering paths, and blackmail transactions that touched every corner of the city. Judges, cops, union heads. One name appeared more than the rest. Nolan Greer. Greer had once worn a badge. Now he wore silk and steel, ran half the city's legitimate enterprises like a benevolent despot, and the other half like a street-level god. People said he went to Mass, but not to pray, only to remind the saints who was in charge. Father Brown found him in the oak room of the Adelphi Club, dining on steak that bled too freely and wine poured by hands that feared to spill. When the priest entered, every fork paused mid-air. Greer didn't look up until Father Brown was already standing at his table. Father, he said slowly, this ain't Sunday. No, Father Brown said, but your reckoning may be. Greer laughed softly, leaned back. You always talk like that? Only when I've run out of polite ways to say murder. Greer gestured for him to sit. You're brave. I'll give you that. No, Father Brown said. I'm just tired of watching the city bury the truth beneath cement and ceremony. You think I had Mallory killed, Greer said. That's cute. I think Mallory had a book, Father Brown said, and that book made him dangerous. Greer's smile slipped. Even if that were true, you got nothing. No witnesses, no confession. Father Brown pulled a folded page from his pocket and laid it on the table. A single torn sheet from the ledger. A name, a date, a payment. Greer's. You left your name, Father Brown said. The truth always does, even when men try to write it in dust. Greer stared at the page for a long moment. Then he crushed it in his fist. Where's the rest? He said. Safe, Father Brown replied. But not for me, for the girl. Lenora, Greer muttered. Of course. She came to me, Father Brown said, hoping I'd find it before you did. Or maybe hoping I wouldn't. Greer stood. You're meddling in things that don't concern you. Everything concerns me, Father Brown said, especially sin. It stains every hand it touches, including yours. That night, the bookstore burned. No alarms, no witnesses, just a glow in the skyline and the sound of old truths turning to ash. But the ledger wasn't there. Father Brown had moved it earlier, sealed it in a package, and delivered it to a lawyer with more integrity than fear. The kind of man who had once confessed to Father Brown that he hated the law, but loved justice too much to leave it behind. When Lenora returned, it was with rain on her coat and a bruise darkening her cheekbone. She didn't cry, but she shook when she reached for the candle at the altar and lit it with hands that no longer pretended to be steady. He found me, she whispered. He said if I didn't give it to him, he'd make sure no one else ever wanted to. You didn't give it to him, Father Brown said. No, she said, But I wanted to. I know. She looked at him then, really looked. Why do you do this? Why care? Because the truth matters, he said. Even when it's written in dust, it speaks louder than any lie shouted in gold. The newspapers ran the story a week later, a full list of names, charges filed, warrants issued. Nolan Greer vanished. Some said he'd gone south. Others said he was already buried beneath the foundations of a building he once owned. Father Brown didn't care. He lit another candle beside Lenora's and said a prayer, not for the dead, but for the living who carried their ghosts with them. Outside, the city coughed up another night of rain and neon and footsteps in alleys where saints once walked and sinners still whispered. And somewhere in that darkness, the dust settled again, waiting for someone else to see it, waiting for someone else to read the truth. Chapter 12. The Final Benediction. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, long enough to wash away footprints, bloodstains, and half-hearted promises. The city drank it up, like a sinner who knew the bottle wouldn't save him, only delay the fall. Father Brown stood beneath the arch of St. Gabriel's, a crumbling relic of faith, in a neighborhood where the only religion left was survival. The gargoyles wept rust from their mouths, and the bell hadn't rung in months. Not since the last organist had vanished without a word, leaving only a hymn unfinished on the stand and a cigarette still smoldering in the pew. That wasn't the case that brought Father Brown here tonight. That was just another psalm without a chorus. No, tonight's case was quieter, more final. The woman came in just before Vespers. She wore a black veil that didn't belong to mourning so much as it did to hiding. Her perfume was subtle, expensive, and wholly out of place among the incense and mildew. She glided through the chapel like someone looking for forgiveness, but unwilling to kneel. She didn't speak until the candles were nearly gutted out. "My name," she said, "is Margot Fenwick. My husband is missing." Father Brown looked at her over his glasses. Missing is a strange word for a man who's known to everyone and trusted by none. She didn't flinch. "You know him?" "Senator Fenwick attends the early mass," he said. "Never late, never kneeling, and never without the scent of ambition stronger than his cologne." Her mouth curled faintly at the edge, not quite a smile. "Then you'll believe me when I say he didn't just disappear. He was taken, or silenced, and I think I know who." "And yet you've come to a priest," he said, "instead of the police." She exhaled smoke she hadn't drawn. "Because the police already know, and they're not looking." Father Brown said nothing for a moment, studying the flicker of the candlelight on her face. She had the kind of beauty that aged like a blade, sharper with each passing lie, not hardened, just polished. "Tell me," he said. She began with the blackmail. Not the type most people imagine, photographs or scandalous letters. No, Fenwick had found something more dangerous. Names. An old list from his days as a prosecutor. People who paid to stay off the docket. Judges, businessmen, police captains. The list had been hidden, forgotten, until last week. She found it in his study, along with a note scrawled in his tight, efficient hand. "If anything happens to me, this list goes public." Then he vanished. "I didn't agree with how he lived," she said, "but I never wanted him to die." "Is that what you believe?" Father Brown asked softly. "Or just what you need to believe to sleep at night?" She turned to go, but paused at the door. "I gave you the truth. What you do with it is up to you. But if you wait too long, the only thing left will be the lies." After she left, Father Brown remained still for a long time. He didn't pray, Not yet. He thought. Thought about what kind of man hides a list, not out of fear, but out of leverage. Thought about what kind of woman brings that list to a priest instead of burying it herself. And he thought about what kind of city needs a man to disappear before the truth starts breathing again. He found the list where she said it would be, tucked between the pages of a dusty psalter in the sacristy, delivered by a courier with no return address. Names, numbers, dates, each one a tick of a clock, winding down towards something catastrophic, and one name that sat heavier than the rest, Captain Lawrence Shaw. Shaw had once worn his badge like armor and used it like a club. Now he ran the Vice Division, and rumors of his connections to half the city's unsolved murders were louder than church bells. But no one ever proved a thing. He was too smart for that, or maybe just too protected. Father Brown didn't confront him, not directly. He went to the one man Shaw hated more than death. Detective Alec Mara, retired, bitter, and still drinking from the cup of unfinished justice. He found Mara in a bar called the Black Cowl, hunched over a chessboard no one else played. "You've come for a confession," Mara said without looking up. "Not mine," Father Brown replied. Mara studied him with eyes bloodshot, but not blind. "Fenwick?" "Yes." "Dead?" "Missing?" "Same thing, in this city." Father Brown laid the copy of the list between the pawns and bishops. Mara stared at it for a long time. "I built cases on 3 of these names, all thrown out. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses recanted. Because of Shaw, so you believe me." "I always did," Mara said. "I just never had the proof." "Now you do." That night, word spread, quietly, like rot beneath floorboards. Some men locked their doors, others packed bags. Shaw didn't run. He invited Father Brown to dinner. The restaurant was high enough to see the whole city, glass walls, linen napkins, and a view that let men like Shaw pretend they were above everything, even their sins. "You've stirred up a mess," Shaw said, as the waiter vanished. "People are scared." "Are you?" "No," Shaw said, "because you're just a priest, and you can't do anything without turning the other cheek." Father Brown sipped water. "That's the funny thing about cheeks. You only get 2. Shaw leaned forward. "You've got no proof, just a piece of paper, no chain of custody, no way to prove who wrote it." "I don't need to prove it," Father Brown said. "I only need to believe it, and let others decide what that means." "You think the public will care?" "No," Father Brown said, "but I think one of the names on that list will." The next morning, Shaw was arrested. Not for murder, for tax fraud. It wasn't glamorous, but it stuck. The day after that, Senator Fenwick was found, alive, disheveled, hiding in a church basement in the industrial district. Said he'd faked his disappearance to smoke out the threat. Said he wanted to watch what the city did when it thought he was dead. Father Brown sat with him in the chapel as the candles guttered low. "You used your own wife," he said. Fenwick shrugged. "She's used me for years. It's a mutual agreement." "You made yourself a martyr to expose men like Shaw." "I made myself bait," Fenwick corrected. "You're the one who made it a crusade." Father Brown rose. "Don't confuse survival with sacrifice." Fenwick chuckled. "Will you give me absolution?" "No," Father Brown said, "but I'll give you something better." "What's that?" "A chance to do penance. Whether you take it or not is up to you." As he left the church that night, the rain finally stopped. The streets glistened in the weak light of morning, washed clean for now, though the stains never really left. Father Brown walked slowly. the weight in his coat pocket, not of a gun, but a final, folded copy of the list. It was gone by morning, mailed anonymously to a reporter who'd once lost a job for printing too much truth. The headline that followed simply read, "No one is untouchable." It wasn't justice, not really, but it was close enough to grace. And sometimes, in a city like this, that was the final benediction.